Hello, I'm Alyson Le Grange. This is Vantage on Firstpost. Let's get started. The war in Ukraine is escalating. Last night, Russia launched a ballistic missile at Ukraine, with Russian President Vladimir Putin making a rare address afterwards. He says the Ukraine war is growing into a global conflict. Tonight, we'll tell you where this war is headed. In India, the fallout of the Adani row is growing. A former chief minister is now being dragged into the controversy. Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu now has an arrest warrant in his name. The International Criminal Court has accused him of committing war crimes. In Canada, Justin Trudeau's information warfare against India is backfiring. And why the island nation of Tuvalu is uploading itself to the metaverse. All this and more coming up, but first the headlines.
Brazilian police call for the indictment of former President Jair Bolsonaro. This is over an alleged 2022 coup plot. It was to prevent the current leader, Lula da Silva, from taking office. Bolsonaro says he is a victim of persecution. The charge of attempting a coup carries a sentence of up to 12 years in prison. In India, at least 10 Maoists killed in an encounter in Chhattisgarh's Sukma district. Several weapons, including AK-47 rifles, have been recovered. A search operation is still underway. Chhattisgarh's chief minister says that nearly 200 Naxals have been eliminated in the last 11 months. Taiwan's president to visit Taipei's 3 remaining diplomatic allies in the Pacific. But no details given on whether there will be transit stops in the US. Taiwanese presidents usually use visits to allied countries to make stopovers in the US. A move which angers China. Washington is Taipei's most important international backer and arms supplier. French President Emmanuel Macron slams Haiti's Transitional Council, calls them total morons for sacking the country's civilian prime minister. Haiti's foreign ministry summons the French ambassador, calls Macron's comments unacceptable. And a new COP29 draft deal proposes rich nations give $250 billion annually by 2035. This is to help poorer nations combat global warming. While the amount is more than double the previous goal set 15 years ago, but it is less than a quarter of the number requested by developing nations.
The war in Ukraine is escalating. A few days ago, Joe Biden gave Zelensky a parting gift. He allowed Ukraine to use long-range weapons against Russia. Now Moscow is retaliating in kind.
In response to the use of American and British long-range weapons, on November 21st of this year, the Russian armed forces launched a combined attack on one of the facilities of the Ukrainian defense industry complex.
This is the attack Putin was talking about. These pictures are from last night. Moscow launched a hypersonic missile attack on Dnipro city in Ukraine. Just look at this. Those bright, powerful flashes of light coming down from the sky. Now, these are missiles hitting Ukraine. There were no significant casualties, but the damage on the ground appears to be extensive. What kind of weapon did Russia use on Ukraine? This missile, it was an IRBM. Now, that stands for Intermediate Range Ballistic Missile. They can travel up to 5,500 kilometers. These are large missiles. They can fly far and high. They are faster than the speed of sound. Now, this makes them very difficult to intercept. Russia deployed a new missile yesterday, something they haven't used before. It's called the Oreshnik, which means the hazel. This is an experimental weapon. Russia doesn't have many of these in its arsenal. They can carry multiple warheads, including nuclear ones. Thankfully, no nuclear warheads were used last night. But will that be the case in the future? That possibility cannot be dismissed. Vladimir Putin has issued a fresh warning to the West.
In the event of an escalation of aggressive actions, we will respond just as decisively and symmetrically. I recommend that the ruling elites of those countries that are hatching plans to use their military contingents against Russia seriously think about this.
Ukraine and Russia have been at war for 1,000 days now. There have been some rumblings of a potential truce. However, both Kiev and Moscow are nowhere close to coming to the table. The fighting remains as intense as ever. In fact, it's getting worse. This conflict is now entering a new phase, missile warfare. Ukraine's president has spoken out. He says Russia's attack was a clear and severe escalation.
Today, our crazy neighbor once again showed what he really is and how he despises dignity, freedom, and human life in general, and how afraid he is.
What about the United States? Interestingly, before Russia launched yesterday's attack, they had informed Washington in advance.
The United States was pre-notified briefly before the launch through nuclear risk reduction channels.
What does this disclosure tell you? Putin is setting boundaries for the West. He is giving a clear message: stay out of Ukraine. Don't let Kiev use Western missiles to attack Russia. That's exactly what Ukraine did this week. They struck Russian military assets deep inside Russia. Western missiles were used for this mission, like the Atacms from America and the Storm Shadow missile, which is made by the British and French. These can hit targets from a distance. Putin has responded to this by raising the stakes. He is bringing more lethal weapons to the battlefield. Yesterday's attack was a demonstration. Russia is signaling its readiness. It is willing to use long-range weapons, even missiles which can carry nuclear warheads. Kiev is defenseless against them. It doesn't have any radars to detect an attack like this, nor does it have any air defense systems which can shoot down these missiles. Kiev is now asking its allies for these capabilities.
In detail, we are talking about strengthening the air defense shield over Ukraine to provide Ukraine with systems that are able to intercept such types of missiles. These systems exist over the world, and thus, it's time to hand them over to Ukraine.
So the ball is back in the West's court. Will it allow Ukraine to continue striking deep inside Russia? How far is it willing to go? Would it risk nuclear escalation from Putin's Russia? And how much support can the West realistically provide? More importantly, how long can Kiev rely on Washington? Joe Biden has been Ukraine's strongest military backer. His successor, Donald Trump, appears eager to end this support. Biden's last-minute shift on long-range weapons gave the Ukrainian forces a boost, but the optimism has faded quickly. Ukraine is now confronting its limitations again. As the conflict becomes more chaotic, this war is entering a dangerous phase. Let's turn to India now, where the fallout of the Adani row is growing. We told you about this case yesterday. US prosecutors have accused Gautam Adani and his aides of bribing Indian officials. How much? Around $265 million. They allegedly used these bribes to secure deals with state energy companies. The Adani Group has denied these allegations, but like I said, the fallout is growing, especially in the state of Andhra Pradesh. The lawsuit says that $200 million were paid to a high-ranking official in the state government. That's nearly 75% of the total bribe amount. The lawsuit does not name this official. It calls him Foreign Official Number 1. But a complaint by America's market regulator dropped a hint. It says Adani offered bribes to the then chief minister. Now that's Jagan Mohan Reddy. He was the Andhra Pradesh chief minister from 2019 to 2024. His party has denied these charges, and they said that there was no direct deal with Adani. Instead, deals were signed via a central government entity. The same with Tamil Nadu. That's another state named in the US lawsuit. Their government has also released a statement. It says no deals were struck with Adani. Everything was done via the centre. That's the political fallout of the case. Now let's take a look at the financial. Adani companies recovered partially today. Adani Enterprises rose more than 2%. Adani Energy fell almost 7%, and Adani Green Energy fell nearly 8%. Indian regulators are also being alert. They are probing whether Adani disclosed the US lawsuit to investors. If not, it could be in more trouble. There's also focus on India's state-owned banks, like the State Bank of India, Punjab National Bank, and the Bank of Baroda. And these banks make up around 16% of Adani's debt. So investors fear a spillover. A few global banks are also concerned. Reports say that they are mulling their next move, whether to keep lending to Adani or not. Questions are also being asked about the geopolitical fallout of this case, especially on India-US relations. The White House was asked about this on Thursday. Listen to their response.
So obviously we're aware of these allegations, and I would have to refer you to the SEC and DOJ about the specifics of those allegations against the Adani Group. What I will say is on the U.S. and India relationship, we believe that it's stands on an extremely strong foundation, anchored in ties between our people and cooperation across a full range of global issues.
Adani is also facing heat in Australia. The company has mining investments in that country. It is now facing accusations of racism. An Aboriginal group has filed a complaint against them at the National Human Rights Commission. This comes after a major blow-up in Kenya, where Adani had airport and energy deals lined up in the African country. But on Thursday, Kenya's president cancelled them. His decision was met with a standing ovation. The global fallout will be talked about in the coming days, and so will the domestic impact in India. Two of the accused parties have denied deals with Adani. India's main opposition wants him arrested, so all eyes are on the US probe, and we'll be tracking this story closely. Now let's talk about the war in West Asia. There's been a major development. The International Criminal Court has made its move. It has issued an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu. The Israeli Prime Minister has been accused of orchestrating war crimes and crimes against humanity. First, let's take a look at the warrant. It has been issued for two people, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Gallant was fired from his post earlier this month, but he was in charge for more than a year of the Gaza war. So the ICC wants to arrest him too. The ICC accuses the Israeli leaders of using starvation as a method of warfare. That is a war crime. And the ICC says both Netanyahu and Gallant are criminally responsible. The court chamber also accuses them of crimes against humanity, like murder, persecution, and inhumane acts. There's a legal definition for all of these terms. The ICC explained their reasoning in a statement. But let me read out one portion which sums it up. The chamber found that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the lack of food, water, electricity and fuel and specific medical supplies created conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of part of the civilian population in Gaza, which resulted in the death of civilians, including children, due to malnutrition and dehydration. Now, this is the operative part. This is why the ICC wants to arrest Netanyahu. The Israeli Prime Minister lashed out at the warrant, calling it anti-Semitic. and saying that it would not deter him.
This is an anti-Semitic act that has one goal, to deter us from exercising our natural right to defend ourselves against our enemies who rise up against us to destroy us.
No biased anti-Israel decision in The Hague will prevent the State of Israel from defending its citizens. Israel will not recognize the validity of this decision.
Netanyahu says that he will continue to conduct the war as he sees fit. He says the ICC warrant won't make him change his approach. So can the ICC really do anything to force his hand? Not exactly. The ICC doesn't have its own police force. They can't send officers into Israel and slap handcuffs on Netanyahu. So the Israeli Prime Minister is safe as long as he remains in Israel or in countries that don't accept the ICC. There are 124 countries that are a party to the Rome Statute, the law which empowers the ICC. Now, these are the countries that accept the ICC's jurisdiction, so they are obligated to arrest Netanyahu if he enters their territory. So technically, Netanyahu's travel options just became very limited.
This decision is a binding decision, and all states parties of the court, which include all members of the European Union, are binding to implement this court decision.
Netanyahu can't step foot in Europe anymore, or in Australia, New Zealand and Canada. Most of the West is effectively shut off. It's just the US left. Washington is furious. President Joe Biden issued this statement. He called the warrants outrageous. He said the US would always stand with Israel against threats to its security, and said that there was no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. The last part was a reference to yesterday's other warrant, the one against the Hamas leader Mohammed Deif. Now, the ICC wasn't just focusing on Israeli crimes, it was investigating Hamas as well. The top Hamas leaders like Yahya Sinwar, Ismail Haniyeh and Mohammed Deif. Sinwar and Haniyeh are dead. Their deaths have been confirmed. Israel says it killed Deif as well. This was months ago, but his death hasn't been confirmed yet, which is why the ICC has issued an arrest warrant for him as well. The US says the ICC is trying to draw parallels between Israel and Hamas to show that they are equally brutal. But the warrants don't really say that. The ICC has accused Israel of starving civilians, and it accused Hamas of murder, rape, torture, and extermination. They have been charged with different crimes, but the US doesn't care. They are looking for any excuse to exonerate Israel and Netanyahu.
Let me just say more broadly that we fundamentally reject the court's decision to issue arrest warrants for senior Israel officials. We remain deeply concerned by the prosecutor's rush to seek arrest warrants and the troubling process errors that led to this decision. The United States has been clear that the ICC does not have jurisdiction over this matter.
The US claims there were process errors. It says the ICC doesn't even have jurisdiction because Israel isn't a member of the ICC. But this didn't bother Washington in the past. When the ICC issued a warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin, Russia isn't an ICC member either, but the court issued a warrant for Putin last year, and the US was jumping with joy at that. Biden called Putin's warrant justified and said it made a very strong point. But now that it's a US ally in the dock, Washington suddenly cares about things like jurisdiction and process. It's standard American hypocrisy. The US will probably try to undermine the ICC. They may go after it with full force next January after Donald Trump comes to office. Trump has sanctioned ICC prosecutors in the past, and he's already preparing to do so again. His team has already issued a threat. Hours after the ICC warrant, so Netanyahu may not be stopped from going to most Western nations, but he'll always be welcome in the US, no matter who is in charge. Moving on to the United States, where Donald Trump is setting a record with his pace of appointments. He's appointed over 24 people, including 16 cabinet-level positions. But he's suffered a setback now. 8 days ago, Trump nominated Matt Gaetz as his Attorney General. Now, Gaetz has been accused of sexual misconduct. The appointment shocked Washington. It dominated news cycles for days. And yesterday, Gaetz dropped out, withdrawing from consideration. This makes his nomination the third shortest in U.S. history. Our next report brings you more details.
Last week, Donald Trump was flying back from Washington. It was a short 2-hour journey to Florida. On the flight were a lot of people. His new BFF, Elon Musk, his incoming chief of staff, Susie Wiles, his top legal advisor, Boris Epshteyn, and Matt Gaetz, a Republican congressman from the state of Florida. Trump was looking over his choices for U.S. Attorney General. He had a list of candidates, but Trump being Trump found that list underwhelming. So he turned to Gaetz. His legal advisor was already in favor of the appointment, and once Trump got off the flight, the announcement came. Matt Gaetz was Trump's choice for Attorney General, the man who would head the U.S. Department of Justice. The pick sent shockwaves across the Justice Departments. Republicans were shocked too, and they had good reason. Look at Gaetz's resume. He was investigated in a sex trafficking case. It was after allegations that Gaetz was involved in sex trafficking a 17-year-old girl. There were also other accusations of sexual misconduct, including paying for sex with an underage girl. The Justice Department and the House Ethics Committee had investigated him. He also once invited a Holocaust denier to the U.S. Congress, and even ousted a Republican House Speaker in 2023. Now, Trump may have chosen him, but the U.S. Senate still needed to approve his nomination. Of course, the Republicans were wary about this, but Trump remained steadfast. Reports say he called senators in an effort to shore up support, but even that did not work. Until Thursday morning, Trump was on the phone with several senators, but the team soon figured that Gaetz wouldn't have enough votes. So Gaetz himself dropped out. He said his confirmation was becoming a distraction to the upcoming administration. It was a decision that was wholeheartedly welcomed by many Republican senators publicly.
I mean, there's a sense of relief about it, of course. I think he did a pretty noble thing, frankly, honorable thing by getting out himself. I thought his statement was appropriate, and I look forward to a new nominee that we can get fully behind.
This is the president's cabinet. He's got to choose people who he has confidence in and who are going to be able to deliver, he believes, on his agenda. So he's decided that's not Matt Gaetz.
A successor was chosen swiftly. It's Pam Bondi, the former Florida Attorney General. She was part of Trump's legal team during his first Senate impeachment trial. She also supported him during the hush money case. So Trump is rewarding her. But Gaetz wasn't the only Trump appointment that has been controversial. In 2017, Pete Hegseth was accused of sexual assault. He is Trump's nominee for Defense Secretary. Then there's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He is Trump's pick for Health Secretary. This year, RFK Jr. was accused of groping a former family babysitter. Trump's education pick, Linda McMahon, was sued for allegedly enabling the sexual abuse of children. You would think that allegations like this would end someone's political career, but clearly not in the new Trump administration. Could it be because Trump himself has been accused of sexual assault? Though he, like his nominees, denies all charges.
Now let's talk about Angela Merkel, the former Chancellor of Germany. Merkel was one of the most admired world leaders. Today, her legacy is being questioned. Merkel's critics say that she failed to implement significant economic reforms. They also blame her for relying too much on China and Russia. Merkel is now mounting a defense of her track record. She has written a tell-all memoir. It reveals details about her interactions with Vladimir Putin. It also includes a scathing criticism of Donald Trump. Our next report has the details.
When Vladimir Putin met Angela Merkel in 2007, he brought along his pet dog, Koni. As the dog approached and sniffed Merkel, she froze. The German leader looked visibly uneasy. And that's exactly what Putin wanted. He was fully aware about her fear of dogs. He used this information to rattle her and gain an advantage. Now Angela Merkel has come out with her side of the story. The former German Chancellor has written about the incident in her upcoming memoirs, Freedom. In the book, Merkel confirms Putin exploited her fear of dogs, calling it an evidence of his childishness and love for bullying.
I experienced him as someone who didn't want to be disrespected, ready to lash out at all times. You might find that childish and contemptible. You might shake your head at that. But it meant Russia never vanished from the map.
Merkel talks about more such events in her book. She's been working on it since leaving office in 2021. For the last 3 years, she has largely stayed out of the public eye. And during this time, her record has faced growing scrutiny. Merkel is Germany's longest-serving German chancellor, and at her peak, she was one of Europe's most celebrated leaders. But since her departure, Germany has struggled. The economy is on the verge of a recession. Growth has declined sharply. Critics blame Merkel for this economic downturn. Her defense policy is also under scrutiny. Her rivals blame her for making Germany too dependent on the United States. These attacks have only intensified after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Merkel's book is a chance to defend her legacy. It's also an opportunity to offer advice. Donald Trump is all set to return to the White House. Brussels is treading cautiously, hoping to work with Trump rather than antagonize him. Merkel has some advice for the European leaders. She believes Europe shouldn't flatter Donald Trump and writes about her interactions with him. She says Trump was captivated by politicians with autocratic and dictatorial traits. Merkel says Trump was fascinated with Putin and looked at every issue as a zero-sum game.
For him, all countries were in competition with each other, in which the success of one was the failure of the other. He did not believe that the prosperity of all could be increased through cooperation.
Stepping down from high office has clearly freed Merkel. She's no longer restrained by diplomatic curtsies. It may be a bit late, but the gloves are finally off now.
His heart is breaking.
The fact that, they looked at
Justin Trudeau is losing control, not just of his relationship with India, but even his own government. Earlier this week, Canadian media published a bombshell report. They said Prime Minister Narendra Modi knew about the alleged operation in 2023, the one that Canada says killed Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Now this was a new claim. Trudeau had never accused Prime Minister Modi directly. So the report raised eyebrows. And who was the source? A senior national security official in Trudeau's government. And not just Prime Minister Modi, the report also said Foreign Minister Jaishankar was in the loop. But days later, Canada has issued a clarification. They now say that they have no evidence linking Prime Minister Modi or Jaishankar to the operation. Any suggestion to the contrary is inaccurate. So what exactly happened here? Is Trudeau covertly leaking things to pressure India? Or has he lost control of his own officials? Either way, it's a bad look on him. Both Trudeau and Prime Minister Modi were in Brazil this week for the G20 talks. Naturally, the two leaders kept away from each other. But US President Joe Biden was seen trying to pull them together. Take a look at this. Pictures aside, what's the status of ties? This week's media report threatened a bigger rupture. India was quite frank about that. New Delhi called them ludicrous and worthy of contempt. It also warned Canada of further damage to ties. Maybe that's why Trudeau clarified today. But beyond that, he isn't doing much. The Indian consulate has cancelled several consular events in Toronto, or rather has been forced to cancel. Remember, one such camp was attacked by Khalistanis this month, so India has been asking for more security. But apparently Canada hasn't agreed to the demand. As a result, more consular camps have been cancelled, including the one at a police facility. These camps are very important for the Indian community in Canada, especially for issuing life certificates. But right now, everything is on pause. Meanwhile, there is some relief for Indian travellers. Canada had introduced additional security screening for Indians flying into their country. The Transport Minister said it would cause some delays. And why were these checks introduced? Apparently, out of abundance of caution. But those checks have also been rolled back now, so no more additional screening for Indians. The big issue, however, remains the leak against Prime Minister Modi. It suggests major problems in Trudeau's ranks. Either he has rogue officials leaking fake details about a head of government, or he ordered the leak himself. Both scenarios are problematic. And it wouldn't be a first. Last month, Canadian officials leaked the name of India's Home Minister Amit Shah. They said that he was in the loop for the alleged ops. And who leaked it? Trudeau's National Security Advisor and Deputy Foreign Minister. They were later outed by Canadian media, and that's when they revealed that it was a calculated decision. So Canada is using fabricated leaks against India. New Delhi has clarified each time, but it needs to level up in this information warfare. If not, Canada will set the narrative. And now let's take a look at what's happening in Pakistan. The country is gearing up for a massive protest. It's supposed to take place on Sunday. Now, the protests in Pakistan are nothing new. They keep happening. Sunday's protest is being organised by former Prime Minister Imran Khan's party, the PTI. What makes this protest different? Well, Imran Khan says it's a do-or-die situation, and he has issued a final call. The direct appeal from Imran Khan seems to have spooked the Pakistani government. They have called for backup and brought thousands of troops into the capital, Islamabad. Here's our report.
November 24th is D-Day in Pakistan. A nationwide protest is scheduled to take place. People are expected to march from all corners of the country and make their way to the capital, Islamabad. The protest has been organized by the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf Party, or PTI. It's the party led by former Prime Minister Imran Khan. Khan has been in jail for over a year. He's facing dozens of criminal cases, more than 200 according to his party. Every time he gets bail, another case magically pops up, so he's stuck inside. This happened this week as well. Imran Khan secured bail in a corruption case, one of the numerous Toshakhana state gift cases, but the Pakistani government ruled out his release, saying he still has a lot of other cases pending. So Imran Khan remains in jail. His party, the PTI, keeps holding protests. They keep trying to secure Khan's release, only to fail every time. But now it seems that Imran Khan has had enough. That is why he called for a mega protest on November 24th. He wants a massive show of force so that the Pakistani government is compelled to negotiate with him. This is different from other PTI demonstrations. It seems Khan has made a personal appeal this time around. He made a final call a few weeks ago, specifically reaching out to farmers, lawyers, civil society, and students. He asked them to take the future of their country into their hands and come out in large numbers. That isn't all. This time, Imran Khan's wife, Bushra Bibi, also made an appeal. Bushra Bibi was in jail for over a year too. She was also charged in multiple cases. But she finally secured bail last month. Yesterday, the PTI put out this video of Bushra Bibi. This was her message to the nation.
आज मैं खान का एक पैगाम देने आपके सामने आई हूँ। खान ने पूरे पाकिस्तान की आवाम से अपील की है कि 24 नवंबर को वो सब बच्चा इस एहतजाज का हिस्सा बने। ये सिर्फ एक खान की जंग नहीं है, ये आप सबकी, ये मुल्क की हकीकी आज़ादी की जंग है।
The PTI is staking everything on Sunday's protest. They want a massive turnout. That's why they're going all out. All PTI members, from their MPs to local level leaders, are being assigned duties for Sunday. Even top PTI leaders have been given a mandate to stay on the streets. They won't be allowed to withdraw to safety, even if they're confronted by the police or other government forces. The PTI hopes that this mandate galvanizes party supporters, who are often left to face the authorities while the top leaders flee. The PTI hopes to reassure supporters and hopes that this will convince thousands to take to the streets. The Pakistani government is wary. It's readying Islamabad for an influx of protesters. The capital has arranged for 22,000 additional security personnel. They've brought in paramilitary forces. They've put a call out for anti-riot gear, tear gas and rubber bullets. Islamabad has also readied 1,200 cargo containers. These will be used to block major roads, to slow down the demonstrators. The Pakistani government has also imposed restrictions on public gatherings and processions. Islamabad is set to resemble a war zone on Sunday, in an effort to dissuade Imran Khan's supporters. But will it work? Will the protest fail? We'll find out on Sunday.
In what seems straight out of science fiction, a robot has performed surgery and made history. In a world first, the robot performed a double lung surgery on US medic Cheryl Mekar. Now, she had been living with a lung condition which made it difficult to breathe. The transplant was successful, and Mekar had been finally able to take a good breath. So why did a robot perform the surgery? How did it happen? And what are the benefits and the risks of robotic surgeries? What other surgeries have robots performed? Our next report tells you.
US medic Cheryl Mekar has led an active life. The 57-year-old spent years scuba diving, getting her black belt in karate and riding her motorcycle. But in 2010, she was diagnosed with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. That's a lung condition which makes it difficult to breathe. And it changed Mekar's life. Her health went downhill, and when the pandemic struck, it made matters progressively worse. She spent years looking for a solution. Eventually, she was put on the list for a double lung transplant. And finally, she got the call.
97. Oh, shoot. 97.
She was to have the surgery, but with a twist. It was going to be performed by a robot.
Later, I got the call. They said they have a 98% match, and how soon can you get here? And my first reaction was, holy you know what, and I'll be there in 2 hours.
And now, Mekar is a part of history. She has become the first person in the world to receive a double lung transplant by a robot.
Cheryl, we were able to do both lungs robotically. You were the first in the world. And when you hear something like that, I don't know how to describe that. That's first in the world. What, there's 8 billion people? And I was the first to have that done.
The surgery was performed at a New York hospital. A team of doctors worked in tandem with a robot, the Da Vinci X1. The doctors made small incisions between Mekar's ribs, then employed the robot to remove the deceased lungs, prepare the site for implantation, and sew in the donor's lungs. It was a 7-hour-long procedure, after which Mekar was able to take a good breath at last. But why did a robot perform the surgery?
Pain tends to be a decent problem for patients afterwards. In terms of the robotic transplant, instead of something that is probably 8 inches in terms of an incision, we can get it down to a 2-inch incision. And so, and then we put the small ports in for the robot. So there's significantly less trauma on the chest wall.
So the surgery is minimally invasive, which speeds up the recovery and healing process and shortens the hospital stay. Of course, robotic surgeries have their risks, similar to surgeries performed by humans, but the benefits outweigh the risks.
Definitely double lung transplant.
In robotic surgeries, complex procedures are performed with more precision. There are fewer complications, such as surgical site infections. There is less blood loss. The scars are smaller and less noticeable. And of course, patients are in lesser pain, so recovery is quicker. This is why robotic surgeries are making rapid advancements. Robots are regularly used in all kinds of surgeries, like kidney transplant, hip replacement, gallbladder removal, and cancer procedures. In a first, 2022 witnessed a partial lung transfer by a robot. Earlier this year, in September, a robot performed a single lung transplant. That was a first too. And now, just months later, the world has its first robotic double lung transplant. Thanks to the robo-doctors, it seems we are living in the future.
Let's take a look at Tuvalu now. It's a small Pacific nation located between Australia and Hawaii. Tuvalu has a total of 9 coral islands, all scattered across 16 kilometers. That makes it one of the smallest countries in the world. It's home to 11,000 people, a picturesque paradise, rich in culture, history and life. But it's on the brink of disappearing. You see, Tuvalu consists of low-lying islands. The highest point is barely meters above the water. Rising sea levels, driven by climate change, is eating away at the land. At the current rate, half of the capital will be flooded in 30 years. By 2100, 95% of the island nation will be underwater. So the sea is encroaching, and it brings with it a host of problems. The groundwater is saline, farmlands are poisoned, fish around the island are scarce, people are migrating, and the island is at the mercy of Western aid. It's forcing Tuvalans to confront the unthinkable, a future where their home may no longer exist. But rather than surrender, Tuvalu is embracing an audacious solution, a leap into the digital future. Tuvalu has unveiled the Digital Nation Project. The country will create its own digital twin, another Tuvalu, but in the metaverse. How will it do it? Now, the process will use cutting-edge LIDAR technology, drones and 360-degree mapping. It will capture every aspect of the island nation, its beaches, its homes, its trees, and even its cultural heritage. All of it will be digitized. The government will also create digital passports. The project also serves as an archive of the Tuvalan soul. From sentimental possessions to ancestral tales, all of it will be part of digital Tuvalu. Now, this will create a virtual tapestry of the nation's identity, one that will endure even if the islands themselves cannot. Of course, the plan is a unique one, a virtual replica, but it sparked some debate, even among the Tuvalans. Some see it as a symbol of hope and innovation. Some call it a PR exercise, while many believe it's a last resort. But while Tuvalu moves its assets to the cloud, what real-world options does it have? About 11,000 people live on Tuvalu. Nearly half of them live on the main island. The first option is relocation. Funafuti is already signed deals with several countries, the likes of Fiji, Australia and New Zealand. Many Tuvalans are shifting there, becoming climate refugees in the process. The second option is reclaiming the island. The plan is to dredge the sand and use it to raise the level of the island and to build high-density housing. But the problem is, it's an expensive venture. The total cost would be around $300 million, and Tuvalu doesn't have that kind of money. The third option is creating a floating island. Tuvalu plans to import mine waste from Australia, and it will then create a wall, and this will be all around the atolls. The idea is when the sea hits against the island, its force will be reduced. But this too faces some challenges. There are coral reefs all around Tuvalu. These reefs may not survive the impact of such a wall. So Tuvalu is still weighing its options. It hasn't come up with a solution yet, and as the tides rise, so does the threat to its existence. Its future remains uncertain, a delicate balance between the physical and the digital. Tuvalu's sands may shift, its shores may shrink, but its essence, its people and their culture will endure. In preserving both the tangible and the intangible, Tuvalu sends a message to the world. Its physical nature may fade, but a nation's spirit can rise above the tide. Let's turn our attention to Italy, where 2 tomb raiders stole precious artifacts from the 3rd century BC. The artifacts, which include urns, sarcophagi and beauty accessories, are worth $8.5 million. They were as good as gone, but now they have been recovered, all thanks to the bumbling raiders. They posted pictures of themselves with the haul on Facebook, and obviously they were caught. What a classic robbery fail. But this is hardly the only one. Our next report tells you about some of the worst criminals of all time.
Around 2,500 years ago, the Etruscans flourished in central Italy. This ancient civilization gradually became a part of the Roman Empire. It has a rich cultural history, but the Etruscans left behind little cultural evidence of it. A few written documents, pottery, statues, and lavish tombs. Little did they know that thousands of years later, a couple of bungling tomb raiders would stumble upon this haul. That's exactly what has happened in what's now the Italian region of Umbria. 2 entrepreneurs unearthed 3rd century BC burial chambers in an Etruscan necropolis while excavating the land they own, and they found the treasure. Dozens of artifacts, including 8 urns, finely decorated with scenes from Greek mythology, 2 sarcophagi, one with the full skeleton of a woman in her 40s, and beauty accessories, such as bronze mirrors and a perfume bottle. The haul is worth $8.5 million. So the raiders thought, finders keepers. They tried to sell the loot in the black market. When this didn't work, they took a more tech-savvy step. They posted pictures of themselves with the artifacts on Facebook. You'd think they'd know better. This triggered an investigation with the whole shebang. Stakeouts, phone wiretaps, and air surveillance drones. Finally, the clumsy criminals were caught, and the police seized the loot.
The uniqueness of this recovery lies both in the important number of artifacts that have been seized and in their historical and economic value.
The recovery of the Etruscan funerary reminds us of the importance that archaeological, cultural, historical, and artistic heritage has for the entire Italian territory.
It is emotional to touch a work of art of huge importance. I feel privileged. There is the academic interest, a scientific interest, because not only does one have the opportunity to see, to touch, and be near an object of profound cultural interest.
Now the pair face theft charges that could mean up to 10 years in jail. But they aren't the first criminals to be hoisted by their own petard. 2 men from the UK's Lincolnshire stole thousands of dollars from gambling machines, then posed and grinned for selfies. Obviously, they were nabbed. Some robbers boast before they even do the deed. A British robber posted on Facebook with a selfie the picture of a knife and the words, "Doing Tesco over." The police caught him 15 minutes later. Speaking of dumb actions, a low-level Taliban officer left US officials dumbfounded. He was suspected of organizing attacks on US troops, so he gave himself up and then tried to claim the reward for his own capture. A burglar in China was captured as well, but after 30 minutes of excruciating rescue, because the burglar got stuck trying to squeeze out of a small window. If there's an exclusive club for the dumbest criminals of all time, these people have a lifetime membership. Clearly, some people aren't suited for a life of misdeeds.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell you the story. In Mexico, a huge migrant caravan consisting of 1,500 people marched toward the U.S. border. The Indonesian president meets a very special guest at 10 Downing Street. It's Larry the cat. And snow brings flurries and slush to Parisian neighborhoods. Finally, taking you back in history, on this day in 1963, U.S. President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. The 46-year-old was shot during his Texas campaign. The president had asked about the weather earlier in the day and opted not to have a top on the limousine. The bullet hit his head while the motorcade passed through the city. That's all we have for you today. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.